From MPB Think Radio, this is Now You're Talking, the award-winning show about the most interesting people and stories of Mississippi. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, the editorial cartoonist committed to telling Mississippi's best stories, and we, once again, have a great story today. We're continuing the theme of amazing Mississippi women this Women's History Month with today's guests. Marion Garrard Barnwell grew up in the Mississippi Delta, where her writing life began at age 13 with a column in the town newspaper. For 25 years, she taught writing and literature classes at Delta State University. And her 2024 book, All the Things We Didn't Say, includes her grandmother's 1956 memoir, published for the first time, which Barnwell both reveres and laments, in which challenged her to write her own memoir. An educator, playwright, essayist, and more, Marion joins us today to explain how special it is to be a female writer from the Magnolia State. And we have been visiting Marion for about 25, 30 minutes, and I have probably talked the whole time, and you've gotten to say 3 words, but I have enjoyed not necessarily hearing my own voice, but just getting to catch up with you. Your book is fabulous.
Well, I appreciate all of that, and I enjoyed hearing your story. I no need talking to you about mine then, because I can talk about it now.
Well, yeah, that's the beauty of it, I guess. And I will say this. I sat down yesterday about 8 o'clock. I had done a little bit of work on the house because that's how I roll. And I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to read this book. And I didn't know how long it was going to take me. I didn't know if I was going to get up. I didn't know if it was going to be a tough read, one I didn't get up. I literally sat and read straight through. And it was fantastic. I got 3 pages worth of quotes and notes. But the bottom line is, thank you for not only sharing your Ganny story, your grandmother's story, and also, too, you being so open and honest about your own life. And I think that because of how she wrote her memoir, that was kind of what made you really want to be very open and honest in your own story.
That's right. It was a very difficult thing to realize during COVID, and amidst 2 family crises, that when I went to my grandmother's memoir as a kind of refuge, I was shocked. For this time, I'd read it as a young girl. I was shocked that she evaded all the things I wanted to know. Her feelings were not. She didn't talk about her feelings except for one time, which I'll talk about in a minute. But she would skirt any issues about family relationships, about relationships with my mother. My mother was one of 5 children. She was the only girl. And I was just appalled that she could evade so much of her life in writing her story. So as I was writing about her, I suddenly realized that I could go on and on about all the things she didn't say, or I could choose to tell my story and my half of the story, because she chose to tell all the sweetness and light parts, and it was kind of up to me to tell the rest of it.
She was the same age when she wrote hers that you were when you decided to write yours.
That was one of the uncanny things that happened. There were a lot of synchronicities and uncanny things that happened along the way. I was in the process of writing when I thought, well, how old was she when she wrote her memoir? And I figured it out, and she was 77, and I realized that I was 77, too. And so it seemed very compelling. It seemed like this is the path I needed to choose at that point to address some of the things she needed that she didn't ever talk about, and things I didn't talk about either. She was raised by a very exemplary Victorian mother. Her mother was a principal of a school back in the day when married women were not supposed to work outside the home. And apparently she was a very austere lady, and that's why the city of Tupelo just adored her, because she was so straight-laced that she raised very well-behaved children. And part of the thing that happened with my grandmother, who was her only daughter, is that my grandmother was raised not to express her feelings. So it came, not by choice, but just by the way she was brought up.
And it was that time. It was that Gilded Age. Like you said, there was a term like angel.
In the House.
An Angel in the
House.
Yes.
That's right. Very popular book at the time was by Coventry Patmore. And he described what men look for in women. Basically, just be pleasant and pleasing and do whatever the husband wants you to do. And Virginia Woolf acknowledged that that's the way she was brought up too. And you just have to be sweetness and light all the time. And my grandmother was a marvelous example of that. She suppressed everything about herself in order to be charming and adorable and wonderful and warm. And I speak from experience because my grandfather, her husband, died 2 months before I was born, 1945. And she came to live with us at that time. So she lived with us in the same house with me all my growing up years. And she died when I was a junior in college. So she was there, and I was there. And I know that she took a back seat to all of us, and she kept out of the way for all those years.
For 21 years, she lived with you, and you said that you felt like you didn't even know her.
I didn't know her because we learn to know each other when we tell our pain and sorrow and troubles. That's when we really learn about each other. She wasn't going to do that with me.
And not to get too far into the story, but you literally... your mom and dad, they drank a lot.
They were alcoholics. Let's just say it.
Okay, they partied a lot, and they were alcoholics. And so, and there is a quote here, and I'm going to flip through my notes because, like I said, I filled out 3 pages of notes. Carl Jung said the greatest burden a child must carry is a parent's unlived life.
Right.
You and her would sit there together, and you could almost feel her pain, and she could almost feel your pain, but you didn't discuss it when you could hear that your parents were raising Cain, just down the hall.
That's in my prologue. I set the stage of us sitting in Ganny's room in the very back of the house. She was always in the back of the house. And face to face. She had a rocking chair and a chair facing it for people who wanted to come visit her in her room. And it was a Sunday morning, a particularly lonely Sunday because my sister had gone off to college. She was 8 years older than me, and the cook didn't come on Sunday. And so we were sitting there, and all of a sudden the silence was broken with all this raucous laughter coming from the porch. And it was several rooms away, but we could hear it. We could not hear it, as I say, in the memoir. And we didn't say a word to each other about it. We just totally pretended that the elephant was not in the room.
Wow. The thing about your Ganny, she was absolutely a fantastic writer.
Yes, she was.
I mean, this was one of the lines that really jumped out at me. Once again, flipped there, basically talking about why she lived in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And let's see. Oh, I can't find it. Naturally. Basically, that she decided to stay where her problems were.
That was me.
That was you that wrote that.
That was me.
Oh, okay.
That was when I was at Delta State.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. That was a brilliant quote. So since you're here, I can tell you that. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. But my grandmother was a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
And I realized, because I taught English for 25 years, that she set her own parameters. She was asked by her second son to write her memoir, and she wrote it the way she wanted to write it. She set the parameters. No, she said, I'm writing just the facts. Mm-hmm. Well, once the writer sets out to do it the way he or she wants to, then who's to argue? But I argued.
That's right.
In my head, I really got really furious with her. Well, why does it have to be just facts? Why do you say you don't have the writing ability that your husband has? Why? Because it's not true. That's not true. So I caught her in her first little field, right smack dab in the first sentence. And then the ending was, don't grieve for me when I die, because I've always been so happy. Well, no, you weren't always happy.
Right.
I was there. You can't really put that one over on me.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, the one exception to her avoidance of feelings is, to me, the most interesting part of her memoir. When she was 20 years old, her father, who had been diagnosed with dropsy, which is congestive heart failure, what we call congestive heart failure today, was told by a cousin, or I believe it was a cousin, that there was this great place in Georgia, Indian Springs, that had cured people of all kinds of ailments. The springs were magical. They were something about the water, and that he should go and see about this dropsy. Well, he asked my grandmother to go with him, and she hadn't been anywhere but Memphis and Tupelo, and so she went with him on the train, and this was 1899. And went to Indian Springs, Georgia. And she says in about 5 paragraphs, she's writing this for her 5 children, remember. And in about 5 paragraphs, she talks about falling in love with this man who was the medical student attending to her father. And she says, I was just crazy about him, and I wore his diamond ring the whole time I was there. Now, she forgot who she was writing for in that moment.
Yeah.
And here's the end of that marvelous story. And he took her places, and she just comes to life. She has her first taste of Coke, and she said, I didn't like it very much. But, that was a thrill. And
it also had cocaine in it.
It had cocaine in it. She was not aware of that, but it might have, loosened her up a little bit. And she just blossomed when she was in Indian Springs, partly because she was away from her mother and the strictures of home. And her father was, from what I could glean, her father was very supportive and wanted her to expand herself and her life and all, have some opportunities to live a bigger life. So when I was rummaging through all these letters that were in my mother's secretary, I found this letter, and the return address was scrawled in such a way that it was as if the person didn't want somebody to know who was writing the letter. And I almost missed it, and I opened it up, and it was from this young man that she had fallen in love with in Indian Springs. So I have since been really thinking about this situation, and I'm doing a little bit of fiction about it and trying to reinvent my grandmother's life and giving her some more opportunity. She doesn't, in my version, my new version, she doesn't end up with this young man, but he inspires her to lead a larger life.
Didn't she reach out to him later on in life?
This is what I'm talking about.
That's that letter. Yeah, that was the letter. Okay.
She reached out to him. It's clear.
So she Facebook stalked him before Facebook.
She did. And she wrote the letter to him a year after my grandfather had died.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So obviously she was writing just possibly to say, well, I'm single now. How about you?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? But how many times do we find such a letter in our lifetime written to a grandparent from an old flame?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that after the break here in a second, but that secretary ended up being a treasure trove for you.
Yes, it did.
It really did.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that too. But there is a lot to be said about the gift of actually sitting down and writing letters too.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's like so much. I don't know if texts and tweets and all that are going to
do it.
They're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. Tell you what, we're going to take our first break, and it's, I'll tell you what, I'm enjoying the conversation with Marion Barnwell. This is Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio.
The Measuring Show.
Since 1970, MPB has been enriching the lives of Mississippians.
Everything we do gives us the chance to grow and learn.
With your support, we are always there whenever and wherever you need us. Together through the years, together in the future. Please consider making a donation at mpbfoundation.org. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Dr. Susan Buttress asks the hard questions on Southern Remedy, relatively speaking.
Can you forgive anyone, anytime, for anything? Do we know how to have a healthy relationship? Have you heard this statement, who am I to judge? Have we taken a hard look at what we're doing as adults? Are you feeling happy?
Find out our answers to these questions by listening to the Southern Remedy, relatively speaking podcasts, or listen live Tuesdays at 11 on MPB Think Radio.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
You're listening now. You're talking on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, and we're back with the author, educator, memoirist, Marion Barnwell's with us. And Marion, thank you so much. We've been talking a lot about your grandmother's memoir. Now, this book is kind of, I would say, in 3 segments. It's kind of like her memoir, your reaction to her memoir, and then your memoir.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
That's
it's like a 3-act play.
It's a 3-act play.
3-act play.
That's right.
But it's nice because you were able, because of your mom's secretary, which was chock full of memorabilia and tons of letters, that, because I remember I didn't get to go see your panel at the Mississippi Book Festival because my panel was going on at the same time. So I've got to miss. I wish I had, because I had several friends on that panel. Now I include you in that group. But you were talking about a little bit about that, when they were asking, well, how'd you do your research? In a way, yours was kind of made easy because you had this huge treasure trove of just a very wonderfully educated and, literate family who loved to sit down and write things that are literally worthy of tattoos. Everybody in your family seemed to be able to write some sentence that was so profound and could change the world, including your Uncle Jimmy, and we'll talk about him a little bit too. Your grandmother was a beautiful writer, very descriptive, and like you said in the previous segment, she was not going to tell you the whole truth because that was the world that she lived in.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, I am lucky to have such wonderful writers in my family, Uncle Jimmy being one. My sister is a well-renowned art historian, has written many, many books. They're heavy books. They're like, I'm not talking about heavy deep. I'm talking about 20 pounds heavy, And so I am lucky. Speaking of the book festival, one of the things that pleased me was the people at University Press extracted one line from my memoir to kind of advertise my book. And I said it, and I kind of forgot I said it, but I said, we are so much more than our one particular life.
Oh.
And this is what happened when I read through these letters from my aunts and uncles and cousins and mother and daddy's love letters to each other, is that we begin to see that we are a part of all of their lives and they are part of all of our lives, and it expands us. It's a wonderful process to go through. I'm so high on memoir. I talk to everybody I know about memoir writing and encourage them to do it. And in fact, my son has taken a year off from work to write his memoir.
Really?
Yes. So
That's
if
wonderful.
you don't want to write a memoir, don't come near me.
So is he going to do a volume 2? Because he's pretty young.
He's young. No, he has his own story.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm very careful not to tell my children stories.
You know what? My children don't really. I used to put them up on Facebook and stuff like that. One day they just pulled me aside and they said, "No, let us tell our story."
That's right.
That makes sense.
That's right. It's theirs to tell. So. Memoir writing means so much, and I see how much it helped me, and that makes me excited. And I've had several groups during the time I was writing my memoir and after, encouraging people to write their memoirs. And people want to. Most people do have this secret desire, I think, to write their memoirs, and all I do is tap into it and give them some prompts, and they're off and running.
Oh, that's amazing. Because you also are really big in dreams also.
Yes. In fact, the memoir came about because of a dream.
Tell me, what was the dream?
It was very simple, 3 sentences. I'm on a trip with Ganny. Immersion in water, ? I'm not sure about that. I make sure Ganny is okay. And when I woke up, because I've been in a dream group for 20 years, I knew it was important because of this tingle up and down my spine. And that's what prompted me to go and get Ganny's memoir and read it again. So that dream prompted the whole process.
You think it was Indian Springs? The water?
The water.
Yeah.
Must have been.
Must have been.
Memoirs,
and those statistics, and I don't know that this is true or not, but the moderator was saying that, the publishing houses don't publish a lot of memoirs, at least particularly unless it's like super famous or whatever. But I found that reading memoirs and autobiographies or whatever, that I feel like that's actually more helpful than a self-help book. Because when you read about other people's lives, you realize that maybe you're not alone on this planet with what you're going through. And I found a lot of that in your book, because you and I have a lot of similarities in our families, just whether the highly educated many generations back, and relatives like your mom being an alcoholic, and my mom had some issues, and that made really growing up, like Carl Jung said, the greatest burden of a child must carry is a parent's unlived life. And it was, but I read it and I was just like, it was like comfort food.
Yes.
Just reading that.
We connect each other's stories, and Jesus knew that. Buddha
Yes.
knew that. We know this, that it's our stories that connect us to each other.
That's right.
And his self-help books are a different part of the brain. They come out of the left lobe of the brain.
Yeah, I don't ever use that part of my brain that much.
We don't want to use that part. And there's a great author about that whose name is Ian McGilchrist. He's a British guy. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because I'm going to go off on a tangent. It won't take me but a minute.
Oh, that's fine.
But his thesis is, we've been thinking that they're equal, left side, right side. They're not. The right side is the master, and the left side should be the emissary. The left side the problem that we run into is the left side thinks that it knows everything it needs to know, and it doesn't. And we need to be listening to the right side of the brain, and we need to be writing, and we need to be painting, and we need to be drawing and doing all those things that the right side is so good at. That's the way we grow as human beings.
Well, then I have a chance.
You have a chance.
I have a chance.
Sorry for that digression.
No, I think that was actually brilliant. And with a name like he had, there's no way he could be anything but British.
That's right.
Yeah, he definitely.
McGilchrist.
He doesn't sound German at all. So
No.
That point, you've read hers. You kind of was able to fact check some of it. You were able to put her life into context, which really made. And I love the fact that she wrote them for all 5 children, but they weren't the same exact. She kind of changed it a little bit for each child.
Marshall, one of the great things about this whole experience is I saw her writing her memoir. I was 10 years old. She wrote it in her room. She had a lap board, sat in her little chair, and she had a lap board, and she wrote in this little black notebook. I watched her write her memoir, and that must have made a deep impression on me. But yes, she wrote her memoir for her 5 children. I don't think there were any rough drafts. I don't know of any rough drafts, but I would see her looking out the window for long periods of time. I think she wrote it in her head and then wrote it on paper. But as you say, for all 5 children, she had a different little start. In my mother's, she says, "Okay, Teeny, I'll get out the lapboard and start yours." Well, for my Uncle Billy, she said something like, "Bill, you asked for this. And here it is," because he was the son that asked her to write her memoir. Yeah. So it's amazing. The process that she went through is so different from my process with a word processor.
The last thing about her before we move on to your memoir, because you've got a great story, and I want to make sure you share that. You talked about that it was frustrating because it's like it literally ended right as she got married. And so when you were going through the issues that you said that you were going through, you had some family problems and issues and worries and so forth. And they always say that like when an older person dies, that it's like a library burning down. And you wished you'd had that library. Right. Because you got to figure, it's always like, I always think about my grandmother, putting my parents to bed, or, my dad to bed on December 7th, 1941. Yes. What she had to be thinking, because they just come out of the Great Depression, or were coming out of it. They were still having. Then all of a sudden, the world was catching on fire. Yes. And here they were putting their 6-year-old into bed, and I wish I had her thoughts on that.
Oh, I know. And so I had to glean things, fill in the gaps, fill in the spaces, and I did so with all these letters and books. My Uncle Bill that I just mentioned was great because he wrote a history of Tupelo. Yeah. And so I began to fill in some of the spaces, and I began to see the ways I'm like my grandmother, too, which is frightening, and the ways I'm like my mother, which is even more frightening. But that's what a memoir does. It makes us face ourselves. It makes us delve into the parts that we don't necessarily want to go, but it's so rich when we do it.
That's right. And so you were going to make sure that your children didn't have any gaps to fill in.
Well, I'm sure no, they still probably.
Well, they probably, they're probably reading it, going, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Because that's what we kids do.
But then that will be their path, and that will be their grail to find.
I love this quote. In a mother-daughter relationship already fraught with problems, alcohol made it an inferno.
Yes, that's true. And I adored my mother. I had an ideal.
And she was a great mom when she was a great mom.
Before drink took hold, she couldn't have been better. And I adored her. And I had an idyllic childhood until we moved into a new house. And that was her. She didn't have anything she didn't have anything of her own. She was a housewife, and so she invested her energy into building a house. And once the house was finished, she went into this depression because she didn't know. She didn't have a goal. She didn't have a goal, and that's what women's history is all about. Digging deeply into these women's lives and seeing they didn't have goals. They weren't allowed to have goals. It was supposed to be pleasant, beautiful, and play the piano.
Yeah, like we said before, the tale of two Marys between your grandmother and your sister.
Yes, my grandmother.
What your grandmother could have become if she had had the world the way your sister had.
Right. My grandmother was Mary DuBose Trice Clark, and my sister was Mary DuBose Garrett, and my sister has published and published and published.
Yeah, definitely on that. So your life, your father came from a very distinguished family that went back many, many generations, and you joke that you'd have been the fifth?
I would have been William Montjoy Garrett, the sixth.
The sixth, okay, the sixth.
And that would have been a difficult legacy.
It would have been tough because it's like everybody, even your dad. I mean, everybody was the newspaper publishers. You had politicians. Governors. Governors, yeah.
Yeah, and my grandfather was the chief executive, they didn't call him that at the time, of the Staple Cotton Association in Greenwood, and he was well revered, and still is.
And your dad was a good businessman? And
my dad followed in his footsteps, but I wonder if he hadn't felt such a pressure to follow in his footsteps, if he'd become something different. We'll never know.
Never know. He was not a big man per se, but he was
both 5'4".
But he was a giant personality.
Yes, my grandfather.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. And talking a little bit about your dad. Of course, he lost two brothers and a sister, didn't he?
Yes. He lost a sister when she was 2, but the tragedy for him was losing his brother. They were Irish twins. They were 11 months apart. Yeah. Jimmy joined the Army Air Force. Couldn't wait to go fight the war. He was just a big patriot.
He was older, too. He was like
he had
30,
a
39
wife
years
and 2
old.
children.
Yeah, which is normally that would have gotten him out of having to serve.
He didn't have to serve.
Yeah.
He went because he wanted to.
Right.
And he was lost in action. And that, just in itself is such a traumatic situation. And I think my daddy never got over his loss. And I think he had survivor's guilt. He was not caught because he was head of a plantation operation that they needed the cotton.
Yeah. Watching the Masters of the Air series that was on Apple TV not long ago. It was about the 100th Air Force and the 8th Air Force, 100th Bomber Group, 8th Air Force. Jimmy was in the 44th Bomber Group in the 8th Air Force. They flew different planes, but he was a tail gunner.
Yes.
So you understand after watching that you just realize that, he wrote about things like how beautiful the Mediterranean was and how you could read a newspaper on the bottom, and just a gorgeous writer and everything. But you realize that he had these moments of incredible peace that were sandwiched in between moments of total hell.
And he died in that Mediterranean Ocean that he had just described. Not long.
Literally, like right before.
Literally, not long, yeah. But the greatest line in his letters was when he said, it only takes one man to start a war. It takes 20 million men, women, and children to end one.
Wow.
He was a great writer.
He really was.
Yeah.
And it was a huge loss for your dad, obviously. And you grew up, like I said, you were Shaw was originally Shaw and then moved to Indianola, right? When you were born.
No, by the time I was born, they were in Indianola.
Yeah, they were in Indianola. So,
Yeah.
okay. So,
Yeah.
You and I were talking. I've always loved Indianola because there's just this huge spirit there. And this was even back before the B.B. King Museum was built. And I remember going to speak there one time and how everybody in that room was so excited about the museum coming, how it's going to change things and everything, which has been a fabulous museum.
It has.
You go in there and you look at the guest book, and everybody is from Europe. It's just amazing.
It's amazing
what it's done.
What it's brought.
Yeah.
Yes. But, Indianola has an interesting past. I mean, I seem to be the one that has to bring up the dark side of things. But there were two writers in the 1930s who wrote about Indianola, thinly disguised. One of them was Hortense Powdermaker. What a name.
Yeah.
And she wrote about the divide between blacks and whites in our little bitty town. And a more famous one who wrote Casting Class in Southern Town was John Dollard, and he too showed the discrepancy between the rich and the poor and black and white in our little town. And I think B.B. King has done so much to heal the divide.
I think that'd be a very good time. You wrote very honestly and openly about the Delta. You wrote in 3 parts in the book, and you've got this one section that you're going to read to us now about B.B.
Yeah, and just to set the stage, part 1 is where I describe how glamorous the Delta seems to people because of the great writers who've described it. William Alexander Percy, Walker Percy, Dave Cone, who made the famous remark, the Delta begins in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel and ends in Catfish Row in Vicksburg, and on and on. They glamorize the Delta, and that's part of it. And then in the second part, I talk about Dollard and Hortense Powdermaker and the things they discovered. And in part 3, which I'm fixing to read, fixing is such a good word.
I love that. It's such a Southern word.
There's just no substitute for it.
It's really not. It's perfect.
Yeah. And I'm going to need my glasses, I just realized.
Okay. She's going to get her glasses because, as you could imagine, sometimes print gets very small when you get over the age of 40. So on that. But I got to say, like I said, I love that. What you're about to read is perfect.
Okay. In the spring, and also I edited some of this. I can't quit. I'm still editing this book. In the spring of 1993, we were having drinks at Chris's. Chris and her sister Jessie had asked us to come, 3 couples. It was a lovely summer evening in Chris's beautiful garden of roses and daylilies. The birds were chattering in the crepe myrtles that bordered the garden. At nightfall, someone in the group brought up the subject of our racially divided town of Indianola and what to do about it. The conversation was familiar, but then took a turn when one of us said, "What's the date of B.B.'s concert this year?" B.B. King was called B.B. to his friends and B to his close friends. Jimmy consulted his calendar. "What if," Chris began, what if we have a party?" We waited, sensing more to come. "What if we have a party for B?" We were stunned into silence. "Well, if we do it," Jimmy said. He was the editor of the newspaper. He was kind of the one who knew how to do this. "We'll need to include guests from the black community." "My thoughts exactly," said Chris. "Why not have it right here in this garden?" Slowly, we began to see how it might work. If anybody could get away with a biracial party, it would be Chris. Having served for years as president of the local bank, she was a highly respected member of black and white communities. The rest of us offered to co-host. Maybe we'd pass muster. Jessie ran a successful shoe store. Lanny was a doctor. Barbara was a nurse. Jimmy was editor of the newspaper. Cynthia was managing editor. Claiborne was a farmer, and I was a teacher. We enlisted our black friends and white friends to help us come up with a racially balanced guest list. When we'd completed it, we had 125 people. I think Jimmy told me later that it was more than that to invite, including a man who once had been a member of the White Citizens Council and a man who was assistant principal at the black junior high. We had the usual pre-party jitters. Was the list really okay? Had we left anyone out? Would they come? They did. During the party, I kept watching BB, hoping he was having a good time. I needn't have worried. Every time I checked, he was in the middle of a different group, all smiling or laughing with abandon. Birds chirped in the trees, lanterns lit up the garden, champagne flowed, and our spirits soared. Though Jimmy insisted we keep the media out during the party, the next morning blues historian Robert Palmer introduced several hosts and attendees for a piece that would appear the next morning, June 11, 1983, on the front page of the New York Times. Those he quoted remarked that everyone mingled and had a good time. In his interview, BB said, quote, I do know that although I've been back to Indianola a number of times, last night being able to shake hands with the elite of Indianola on a social basis, well, that was my real homecoming. The next morning, Diane Sawyer introduced CBS Sunday Morning with Ed Rabel doing an interview with BB. Rabel noted that a two-lane street had just been renamed B.B. King Street and asked BB how it made him feel. He said the road gave him a good feeling, but the remarkable part of the celebration happened here at this private garden in Indianola, where some of the town's most prominent citizens threw a party for B.B. King. I didn't kid myself that one party would change anything, but it was not nothing. It was an overture, a time for black guests to meet white guests and white guests to meet black guests, an opportunity for people to meet B.B., shake his hand, see his smile, hear his laugh, human exchanges that can leave an impression, change a mind.
Wow. And BB through the museum is still doing that today.
That's right.
That's amazing.
As you said, people from all over the world come, and it's changed the town. I mean, you go to the restaurants in Indianola and you see black and white people sitting together and talking and having a good time. So if you can imagine, I think it's just really true that one man can change things, or woman.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's talk about your life. You have lived an incredible life. You know, you talked about when your mom's drinking started getting really bad, and it's like the family started falling apart when your dad was drinking a lot too. You ended up going to school up in Washington.
I did.
And okay, folks, you just short of walking on the moon. You've done just about everything. I mean, okay, so you were in school when Kennedy was assassinated. The funeral procession came through Washington. I
was there.
You were there. So
there.
You were there for that. So you got to witness that big, huge piece of history. You were also in the auditorium when the Beatles came in 1964.
The very first concert in this country. Yes, I was there, and I was screaming my lungs out with 1,500 other fans.
Was it amazing?
It was amazing. It was life-changing.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I love the fact that you had a professor that changed your life and changed it in a way that not only made you really fall in love with learning and so forth, but also kind of shaped how you became a professor. And her name happened to be Marion as well.
That's right. And that was my clue that she was going to be important to me, Marion Davis. And she would get so excited when she would teach short stories, and I still love short stories. I have a great books club that that's what we do. We read short stories most of the time. And Marion Davis was just so, that's the only way you really can get people's attention, children's attention, is your enthusiasm, your own enthusiasm. And hers was very contagious. At the end of the year, she told us that she was going to retire from National Cathedral School and go to teach in public school. And we just howled. We were just so upset. She said, "Girls, listen to me. You don't need me, but they do."
Wow. Wow. You also had Mrs. Atchison,
yes,
who was probably not somebody that you wanted to replicate her teaching style. I just thought it was funny that she turned out to be Dean Atchison's daughter-in-law.
Yes, she did. And do you want me to tell the story?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, I was sitting on the front row. We just idolized her. She'd written a book on the Supreme Court. She was just oblivious to clothes. She might wear plaid kilt and a flowered blouse to get. We thought that was just cool. She switched to Carlton cigarettes when nobody even knew that was supposed to help with cancer. And so everybody was just crazy about her. And she walked in the classroom one day, and I was expecting a lecture on the Supreme Court. She never even used a note. She knew American history like the back of her hand. And she pointed at me, and she said, "Marion, what is going on down there?" I didn't know what she was talking about. I went blank. I couldn't even hear what she was saying. But it turned out it was the day that James Meredith enrolled at Ole Miss and the riots that broke out. And from that moment on, I felt responsible for the entire state.
She was putting the blame on you.
Yeah, I felt responsible for the entire state of Mississippi, and I still do in some way, which leads me back to that quote that you misquoted, but that was understandable. You know, when my colleagues at Delta State would say, things are just so bad, I'm leaving the state.
Yeah.
I never felt that way. I always thought, no, I'm staying right here where my problems are.
Well, you and Claver got married. You were in New Orleans. You lived there for a while. He worked on the Saturn V rocket. Once again, a little piece of history for you.
I didn't. He did.
No, he did. That's what I'm saying. He did. He worked on it, on that. But then you decided to move back home.
Right. And came home to farm. I thought it was a big mistake. Turned out not to be a big mistake.
Well, then because you literally said that, going to teach at Delta State saved you.
It saved my life.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. It was a great experience.
Well, we're going to talk about that wonderful life that you've had since then to finish out the show, but we're going to take our last break. You're listening to Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
Both seasons of the 10-Minute Timeout are now available on a variety of podcasting apps. The mini podcast can be binged in a day and is perfect for those that just want a quick listen. Join me, Lacey Alexander, as I sit down with special guests, revisit major moments, and give a platform to the athletes and sports that shape Mississippi. Head over to mpbonline.org to give it a try.
Together through the years, together in the future. MPB, your stories, our mission.
You're listening to Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, and I'm back with Marion Barnwell. Marion, this has been a delightful interview. Thank you so much. We finished up the last segment talking a little bit how you got married in 1968. So
that's right.
Yeah. So, and it's been a good marriage.
It's been a long, good marriage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Claiborne's a good guy. Like I said, y'all have two fantastic kids.
Beautiful children, two grandchildren.
And moving back home, and my wife and I have always joked that, we probably would have not survived if we'd have moved back home. It's because it's just a different universe because you have family pressures and different things like that. But it turned out also to be a huge blessing to get back into there. And I think the biggest blessing was the day you decided to go apply for a job at Delta State University.
It did change my life, and it was just magnificent. I have to tell this story. My closest friend, one of my closest friends, Dorothy Shawn, was the rising tide that lifted all boats. When she came on as chair of the department, she said, "Do not let your work interfere with your creative projects. That's what gives you energy. That's what will make you a good teacher." And she herself was a wonderful model for that. She was a writer, an extraordinary writer, and she didn't get the attention she deserved. She wrote a book called Lizzie, which it's not in print. The press that published it went out of business soon after it was published, and so it didn't get but people who read it, everybody remembers it. Anytime, it's just a riveting story. So she was a great writer, and she inspired us all. And she and I started a literary magazine in 1988, which meant the world to me. We called it Tapestry, and it was a literary magazine for faculty. It didn't have to be English department. It could be, but we had such a good time. Every year we would contribute to the magazine, and it came out once a year. And then we'd have these fabulous parties to celebrate the new issue, and we got to go to some fabulous places like Dockery Farms was one of the places that we would go and read from our works. And Keith McLean and her husband Height were just wonderful hosts. I'll just tell one little anecdote from those days. The English professor loved doves. That was one of his themes when he wrote poetry, was about doves, how beautiful they are. The art department person wrote in his journal and published it in Tapestry about shooting doves. And they ended up just about to have a huge cockfight when Height and McLean started laughing. He just saw the humor in everything, and he had a wonderful laugh. And when he started laughing, even the artist had to start laughing, and the poet had to start laughing, and that just completely, smoothed everything over between the artist and the English professor.
You've got two wonderful kids, too. And,
yes.
And like you said before, they're going to tell their story a little bit. But
I'm careful not to tell their stories.
But like I said, you watched your mom struggle. You remembered the good things she did. Like, for instance, she read you all 14 of the Wizard of Oz books.
Yes, she did.
And she was there. Your older sister taught you to read, which I think is really cool, too. I thought that was a really nice touch. When, after what you've gone through, and of course, what you're, knowing your grandmother and so forth, and reading all the letters and everything like that, what approach did you take as a parent? That you tried to do different, or did you just...
Well, I'll tell you, this alcoholism is a strange business. As you and I talked about, any dysfunction in the family is like the water we swim in, and we don't often see the water. But my brother-in-law was the one who, when my children were very small, I guess they were 7 and 11 maybe. That's not that small, but anyway, they were young. When we were visiting my sister-in-law and brother-in-law at Ocean Springs, and we were talking, and the kids were downstairs, and Ray, my brother-in-law, said, "You have told them about the alcoholism in your family, haven't you?" And we just stopped. My husband and I just looked at each other and thought, well, not really. And so that was it took an outsider to help us see that this is something we had to sit down with our children and explain to them. And they both had the gene, as it turned out.
Oh, wow.
And they both have been remarkable. That they've both been clean and sober for over 20 years and counting. And they've gone on to do beautiful things. I won't start with all the beautiful things they've done, but I'm very proud of them. And it did break the cycle of addiction in our family. So that's a big part of my story.
That is a huge thing, if you can break that family cycle.
That's right.
That's huge.
And we know that because we're so much more enlightened these days since Bill Wilson and AA and since Oprah Winfrey made it possible for us to tell about all these ghosts and skeletons in our closets.
We have about a minute left. Is there anything that I have not covered that you'd like to bring up?
Just that I encourage anybody that feels the need to write a memoir. It's just remarkable how you can see the pattern of your own life. It's like, you see the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. We all have one. We're all on our own hero's journey. And it's just remarkable when we see the pattern.
All Things We Didn't Say is the memoir. It is absolutely beautiful. You're a fan. I've always known you were a good writer, and I've always appreciated all the things that you've given back to Jackson and to Mississippi. I feel like I know you better after reading the book, obviously, and I really am glad that I've gotten to meet you through the book and here today.
It's delightful to meet you too, Marshall.
Yeah, this has been great. We're starting. I mean, obviously, we've got a little bit more. Is there anything else that you want to bring up?
Oh, I will bring up that Libby Hartfield, one of your colleagues here on MPB
MPB.
MPB. Tongue twister. And I finished a book that Dorothy Shawn started on Fanny Cook, who was just a remarkable woman and should be appreciated in this Women's History Month. And we had a one-woman show with Kathy Shropshire that was very popular. In fact, she was so believable that a newcomer from Memphis heard her giving her one-woman show and thought she was Fanny Cook and got really upset when she said she died.
You, if you had a chance, I mean, if I know you get to see your grandmother in your dreams, but if you had a chance to be able to talk to her today,
I'd say, forgive me.
Forgive me? How do you think she would react to it?
I think she would be tickled to death.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think she would absolutely love and thrive this time that we're living in.
And I did have another dream in which she and I were fertilizing the oak tree outside her window. And I took that to mean we were fertilizing the family tree together.
I love that.
By doing this joint project.
That's great. What reaction have you received from the book?
People have been wonderful. People just seem to like it. And they come up and tell me about it, which pleases me no end.
No, I mean, like I said, I've got all kinds. I love the line, it was a Delta thing. When in doubt, throw a party. I thought that is the most true thing I've ever read in a book.
I do know the Delta pretty well.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. There are a few things I've always noticed about the Delta. People love a good party there. The mosquitoes do land at the airport.
And we have good writers.
You have great writers. I've always, when I write, generally, the short stories I've done, it's like either the Delta or the coast are the two things that seem to be the best grist for the mill. And
Clyburn's uncle was Craig Clyburn, who was also a writer, so I'll just throw that in.
Okay. Yeah. So if y'all, if you're not a writer in your family, then you must, would you get shunned? How does that work?
Well, my daughter doesn't write, but she does she teaches yoga and she does personal training, and she's, does real estate. So she's just very
talented too
in a lot of ways, but she doesn't feel the need to write. My son obviously feels the need to write.
It's funny because none of my children draw.
Well,
yeah, because I used to hit their hands with a ruler saying, I want a good nursing home. No, just kidding. But they're very creative.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet they are.
Yes.
And you never know. They might take it up later.
Yeah, it's definitely. This has been just a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure for me too, Marshall. Thank you so much.
Very good. Well, hey, thank you for listening. Special thanks to Marion for joining us again today. I hope to have you back on soon because I love the conversation. If you'd like to hear this or any other past episodes, you can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app on our MPB Public Media app. Now You're Talking is a production of MPB Think Radio with episode and podcast produced by the very talented Lacey Alexander. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy Healthy and Fit next, and join us again next Monday at 10. I'm Marshall Ramsey. Y'all have a great week.